I'm here to talk to you all about Taproot Assets, and Taproot Assets is now available on Lightning, and we're going to talk a lot about the specific use case of stablecoins. So kind of to gauge the room, does everyone here know what Taproot Assets is? Okay. Would anyone like Taproot Assets 101 very briefly? Yeah, okay, all right. One hand, so we'll do very, very shortly. It is a protocol for minting assets on the Bitcoin blockchain, and if those assets are fungible, you can then exchange them on the Lightning Network. So it's assets on Bitcoin that are also can be exchanged. It's compatible with the Lightning Network. So very, very cool and interesting stuff. Let's see if I push this button. Where do I point the thing? Let's see. Hold on. Is that? Maybe low on batteries, this one? The clicker. All right, just a sec, y'all. Okay. Is that working now? There we go. Awesome. Okay. If anyone is interested in Taproot Assets and wants to get a copy of the slide deck, there's also all kinds of links in there as well. So I'll hold that up there for a sec. Y'all can scan that. Let me know if there's any permissions issues. I'll update it for you. Cool. All right. So first we'll do very briefly about me, although we already got that full introduction in Portuguese. I'm a developer advocate at Lightning Labs. If you're curious about any of the stuff that I've done, find my resume on LinkedIn. I'm of course on X and on nosso. All right, let's move along. Here's what we'll discuss, right? So we've got Taproot Assets on Lightning. The Lightning functionality came out over the summer, so a few months back. And so we want to talk today about what can we build with this, right? So we'll talk about new features and possibilities of Taproot Assets now that we have the latest and greatest edition. And we'll talk about how you can build with Taproot Assets. Very briefly, this isn't a very technical talk. We're not going to get super into the woods or the weeds with technicalities, but we'll talk briefly about the tools that you can use for this. And then we'll talk about what does a multi-asset Lightning network look like, right? How does that look? And we can imagine the future there. And we'll talk about this concept called edge nodes. All right, well, let's dive into it. There we go. All right, features and possibilities. There's a couple of things we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about trustless on-chain swaps. We're going to talk about all the different multi-sig options. And then, of course, we're going to dig into the new Lightning functionality. All right, so those not familiar, Taproot Assets is a couple of years old now. It was announced, I don't know exactly when, but a few years back. And we had mainnet functionality on-chain, and just this summer, we now have Lightning functionality. And did any of y'all see the announcement at the main stage just about a half hour, 40 minutes ago? We have a natively issued Brazilian real stablecoin on Taproot Assets now. So very cool, exciting stuff. All right, let's talk about trustless on-chain swaps. So I'll read for a moment here. Taproot Assets users and developers can automatically swap assets for Bitcoin or other Taproot assets via partially signed Bitcoin transactions. All right, does everyone know what a partially signed Bitcoin transaction is? Kind of, it's exactly what it sounds like, a partially signed Bitcoin transaction. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. But this is a cool new thing that's now possible with the latest version. We'll go through it quickly. So it allows people to trade non-interactively in a chain-efficient manner and without requiring trusted counterparties or a centralized coordinator. So I read off the slides, and now I will make up for that by showing you a pretty picture. Sorry, the clicker is being a little stubborn today. So there we go. All right, we have a pretty picture. This is what a partially signed Bitcoin transaction looks like in my head, and we can of course imagine this scenario between Alice and Bob, right? We can imagine that Alice has some Taproot assets, perhaps a Brazilian real stablecoin, right? And she holds this asset, but Alice decides she wants to sell it. She wants to turn that into some sats. She'd rather have some Satoshis. So what Alice does is create a Bitcoin transaction that has an output, right? Sending out her assets, and an input, right? Get her an output, sending her some Satoshis, right? And she signs this. She signs her portion of it. It's a PSBT, partially signed Bitcoin transaction. She then posts this on some forum somewhere, perhaps a service that one of you all will build. Who knows, right? Some cool thing. Bob comes along. Bob says, hey, I have some sats, but I really want this cool stablecoin because that's going to be really useful for me. Bob grabs that PSBT. He adds his inputs, his outputs. He signs them. The two puzzle pieces come together. It's now a complete Bitcoin transaction. He can broadcast that on the Bitcoin blockchain. So I won't dive too into depth on that, but a very cool feature that's available, that's now a possibility. And let's talk, of course, about multi-sig. Because when you're talking about having assets of any variety, whether they be stablecoin or Satoshis, we have to keep them secure, right? So we'll run through this briefly, and then I'll show you another pretty picture. So there's lots of different possibilities for how we can do multi-sig with Taproot Assets now. And I'm going to talk a bit about the different levels, and then I'll show you a picture which will make that a bit clearer. But just run through these quickly. At the Bitcoin script level, we have MuSig2. At the Taproot key level, we have MuSig2 or old school KFM. At the asset group key level, we have both options again, and also both options at the asset level. All right, so if you're not super familiar with the protocol, then this picture here might look a bit odd to you, but basically Taproot Assets, the data structure is like this set of Merkle trees, right? And you can see, if you're familiar with the Taproot upgrade to Bitcoin, we have an internal key, right? We can do multi-sig there, and then at the Taproot or the TapScript level, we can do some multi-sig as well. And then with Taproot Assets, we have this group key level, which allows you to mint assets in batches or tranches, which are fungible with one another, like a stablecoin. And you can do some multi-sig there, and then all the way down at the asset level as well, what Alice or Bob would be holding, right? Then you can do some multi-sig there. So briefly mentioning that, because that is very important for securing assets. Now, let's talk a little bit about assets in Lightning channels. All right, so we're going to show you, hopefully the videos will work, we'll see. We're going to show you opening an asset channel and talk a little bit about how that works. We'll show paying an asset invoice. And then towards the end, we'll talk about multi-hop payments with an edge node and what that means. All right, so I have here, sort of in my head, what minting a Taproot assets, or minting assets on Taproot Assets looks like, right? So we have a Bitcoin transactions with some inputs and some outputs, and that is a very simplified and stylized Merkle tree, which is representing the data that is your Taproot asset, right? So I want to show you this just to get a picture in your head of now we can have Taproot assets on Bitcoin, and then how can we then put them into Lightning channels, right? So if we imagine that Alice does this process and she mints some Alice coin, right? And that Merkle tree there holds the data that contains her Alice coin, right? She can do this on-chain, on the Bitcoin blockchain. And then Alice wants to use those assets to open a Lightning channel with Bob, right? And that, in my head, right, this is what this looks like. Alice had that UTXO, right, that she minted, that has that Merkle tree there with her asset data. And then she uses that as an input to create an output, right, which is the UTXO, which represents that Lightning channel. And you can see that she's moved that Merkle tree data, right, over to that output that is the Lightning channel. So that's a standard Lightning channel you can think of. You know, it's you know, that 2 of 2, multi-sig, and all the standard stuff. There is some Satoshis as well in that channel, which are needed for on-chain transactions, etc. So the same way that you would embed Taproot Assets in a Bitcoin blockchain using Taptweak and all that good stuff, when you create that Lightning channel, you're embedding those assets as well. Right? So hopefully that gets you a bit of picture in your head of how that works. And then, let's go back. There we go. So we can see here, if we started with 1,000 Alice bucks in that Lightning channel, when Alice and Bob are updating their balance with each other, and Alice, say, updates her balance in that channel with Bob and sends him 100 Alice bucks, right? Then this settlement, potential settlement transaction that they're signing between each other looks like this. Like if they settled, Bob would get a UTXO that has a Merkle tree, some Merkle tree data in it that represents 100 of those Alice bucks, and Alice would get a UTXO that has that Merkle tree data that represents 900 of those Alice bucks. So that's kind of what that looks like as you're updating that channel, right? Okay, cool. Now, we've talked theoretically what this looks like. For my fellow tech nerds in the room, this is what it looks like on the command line when we actually open that channel. Here I am, I minted some mega test bucks on testnet 3, and I'm grabbing the asset ID, and we're going to use this to open a channel. And this is what, yep, there we go, LN fun channel. And ta-da, that's really exciting if you like command line stuff, right? That is our transaction ID, and that is we opened a channel using those assets. Very cool. All right, now we're going to pay an asset invoice. Note here the balance of this channel, right? Everything was local. This is the command you would use to create an asset invoice. So we're on testnet 3 when I recorded this. We're using this command, ln add invoice. You can see we've noted the asset ID. So we're paying, right? We're creating a Lightning invoice that can be paid with assets, right? And then here we are, we're going to pay a Lightning invoice using assets. So we're noting the channel ID that we're going to use, and we've noted the asset ID that we're going to use to pay this Lightning invoice. And then I paste in the actual invoice there shortly. Cool, and we pay it. Awesome, and if you've done Lightning invoices on the command line, this will be very familiar to you, and you can see that that payment has succeeded. We got a pre-image, right? So we paid a Lightning invoice using assets. Very cool, and if you have lots of questions about how that works and exchange rates between these two things, we'll get to that in a minute. Cool. And then you can see the channel balance updated. The assets in the balance. The assets in the channel, the balance was updated. Okay, cool. All right, so is anyone here a developer? Do we have some developers in the room? Awesome, cool. So I'll talk very briefly about the tools you can use to build with this, sort of the tech stack that you would use to build an application using Taproot Assets. Obviously, we start with Bitcoin, right? And this works with LND, currently, the Lightning Network daemon, and then Taproot Assets. This is what we were doing. We've changed this up a little bit, so obviously we still have Bitcoin. And now we're using Lightning Terminal, if anyone's familiar with that. Lightning Terminal is a bundle that includes LND, Taproot Assets, and Loop Pool and Faraday, which are optionals if you'd like, but Terminal manages that interaction between Taproot Assets and LND. It comes with lots of cool tools. So if you're planning on building with this, there's Terminal or the Lightning Terminal daemon, lit-d, and there's lots of different experimental releases for that if you want to keep up with what's going on and build with it. And you can join some Telegram channels with us if you'd like. We like to have lots of fun testing out the latest and greatest. All right. Now let's talk about a multi-asset Lightning network and what that looks like, and edge nodes. Has anyone heard of an edge node? No? Cool. Now you all have. Awesome. All right. What is an edge node? An edge node is a Taproot Assets aware Lightning node that routes payments between Taproot Assets channels and Bitcoin channels, right? And I'll show you more pictures in a second to help. All right, an edge node is a service provider with multiple public, or perhaps just one, Bitcoin channels to the Lightning Network and unannounced Taproot Assets channels with their clients. All right. What makes an edge node different to an ordinary routing node or Lightning service provider is the ability to route payments in different denominations over the Lightning Network, right? So an edge node is, imagine, anyone can be an edge node, right? I'm running like an edge node now on Signet more than testnet 3. But, right, anyone can do it. You have to have the infrastructure, you have to have an internet connection, right? And then you just change some settings if you're running Lightning Terminal, LitD, and you can do this, right? So quite cool stuff. Let's have a look. Hold on. There we go. All right. Here's a nice video. Is that this one? Oh, okay. All right. Can everyone still hear me? We're good? Here? Okay, cool. All right. So, do we see our pretty video of a transaction moving over the Lightning Network? And we're going to talk about how assets fit into this. So here's a picture, right? And this is a picture of what's happening. We're imagining the Bitcoin blockchain down there, and what's happening up here is our Lightning Network. And if you can see over here, we have the path through the network where our transaction went is orange, and that's all Satoshis, right? Regular Lightning transactions, HTLCs, everything we're used to, right? And then at the edge over here, we can see that this is green, and that represents sort of an asset channel that was used there. And then on the other side of the network, we can imagine that maybe that's a US dollar stablecoin channel. And then I put blue over here because we can maybe imagine a euro stable channel, right? So we can kind of imagine this, and we look at these channels sitting out at the edge of the network, and then in the middle we have our normal usual Lightning network that we're used to. All right, so why are these channels out at the edges? For a couple of reasons. Taproot channels are now available on the Lightning network, but they're still experimental. They're not quite in the gossip protocol yet, so these are unannounced channels, right? Not entirely private, but unannounced. Sit sort of at the edge of the network. Also, the gossip protocol does not know about Taproot Assets, but it doesn't need to, right? And we'll talk a bit about that. And now, I want to show you this picture. So let's imagine that we have an edge node operator here, right? Which could be any of us in this room. We're running a Lightning node. That little circle is our Lightning node. We have some big standard Bitcoin channels, right? So those 3 channels there in orange, standard Satoshi channels. But because we're an edge node operator, we want to facilitate transactions that are also happening in assets. So we have an array of users out here, right? We have Alice, Bob, Carlos, whomever, right? These are our users, and with them we have asset-enabled channels. So some US dollar stablecoin channels, a euro stablecoin channel, whatever we like, right? So this is what our edge node looks like. And now let's imagine, RFQ. I'm going to come right back to this because this is important. Hold on, there we go. All right, so we have our edge node and we have Alice and Bob. Now Alice has a US dollar stablecoin and she has opened a channel with this edge node provider. And Bob doesn't care at all about that stablecoin. Bob has sats and he doesn't want to care about that stablecoin, right? But Alice wants to pay Bob for web development services, right? And what Alice can do, if she owes Bob, say, $100 worth of, money for the services he provides, she can update her channel balance with that edge node, and then that edge node can send out those Satoshis to Bob, right? And this is a Lightning channel that's happening here, right? But it's a Lightning channel between that edge node and Alice. They update their balance with each other, and then the edge node updates its balance with Bob, right? And vice versa. Maybe Bob buys, owes Alice for a cup of coffee or something, right? And he can send sats to that edge node, and then Alice can receive that US dollar stablecoin. All right, so a very common question we get at this point, which a lot of you may have, is how do we know what kind of exchange rate is going on between there? How does this edge node know how many USD, the stablecoin is worth how many sats, right? And this is where we have this RFQ process, right? Request for quote. is a mechanism that simplifies sending Taproot assets over Lightning Network channels. The request for a quote contains a rate and an expiration time, which allows the sender to decide whether they want to complete the payment and craft a route to the intended recipient. So let's go back to our picture. Oops, now hold on. There we go. We'll do the video in a minute. All right, so let's go back to our picture here. Alice wants to pay Bob for his web dev services, and Bob generates a Lightning invoice, right? In Satoshis. Regular, let's imagine Bolt 11 Lightning invoice in Satoshis. He says, this will satisfy your debt to me, right? And he sends it to Alice. Then Alice goes to her edge node as she tries to pay this invoice and says, hey, how many of my assets do I need to send you to get you to pay this Lightning invoice for me? And the edge node will return a quote, and then Alice can accept or reject that quote at that point. Assuming she's happy with that, she then sends through that payment. The edge node gets its assets, and it sends on the sats, right? Does that make sense to everyone? We got that? Cool? All right, excellent. Now, let's look at this multi-hop payment. Hold on, I'll set this up there. Okay, so the next thing we're gonna watch is a video. Again, this is for the command line people. This is, we're showing a multi-hop payment. So this was a transaction that me and Leo at Lightning Labs did, where he was running an edge node, and I believe he generated a regular Bolt 11 invoice, and then I think it was I paid it using the assets, and he was running the edge node that facilitated the conversion. We can see what that looks like on the command line. All right, so first we're using Lit CLI, which is Lightning Terminal CLI tool. We're going to pay an invoice. We are noting the channel ID. Here is our regular Bolt 11 invoice, and here's the asset ID that we're going to use to pay it. Cool. Go through the usual process, select yes, cool. And you can see here that this is a multi-hop payment, right? There are Satoshis in this channel as well, which is necessary. You can ask me questions about that later, it gets a little in-depth. But you can see we also have that RFQ process that happened in this whole process, right? So in the background, my node said, hey, how many assets do I need to send you for you to pay this invoice for me? And that whole process happened in the background. Awesome, cool. So that is how we then get a multi-asset Lightning network with these nodes running on the edge, right? So these edge nodes. And we can imagine then a Lightning network that doesn't just have a US dollar stablecoin or a Bitcoin Real stablecoin or a Euro stablecoin or whatever it is, all kinds of different assets. And what's really interesting here too is that maybe Alice has the Euro stablecoin and Bob has a US dollar stablecoin. And Bob can say, hey, can you send me some USD? And Alice says, well, all I have are euros, but sure, no problem, right? And sends that out on the Lightning network, and it goes through these edge nodes. Alice sends euros, Bob receives dollars, right? So very, very interesting, and this is what a multi-asset Lightning network now a little bit looks like, and we imagine a lot more so in the future. All right, well, I have gone through my slides a little bit faster than I planned, but I think maybe the organizers here will appreciate that because things are running a little bit further behind. So I am going to put some resources up here on screen. As always, first stop, if you're looking to dig into this stuff, if you're like, hey, I have so many more questions on how this stuff actually works, docs.lightning.engineering is definitely a place to go. We have a ton of information there. Obviously, the repo, if you want, is open source tech, so you can read all the code if you are so inclined. We have a series of demo videos up on YouTube, so if you really like to watch people fumble through doing things on the command line, you can watch me do that, and a whole bunch of series of demo videos there. We got some more coming out soon, specifically focusing on price oracles and the RFQ process. Taproot asset channels, oh yeah, more docs, the RFQ process, and if you are thinking about building on this and you want to actually talk to humans about what's happening, definitely stop by the Slack channel. All right, so I think that's all the slides I have. I will be hanging around. If anyone has any questions, I'll be very happy to talk to you all about this. Thank you so much.